Currently, I'm running for Congress in the 17th District. Running on the SAM line, which is the Serve America line, row H on the ballot. And I'm running basically because I want to bring our local concerns to the attention of national leaders. So my primary focus is local corruption and national dysfunction. But got a lot to talk about with my campaign. It's a very interesting race. There's 5 different people in this race, so the votes could go any which way in this thing, and we'll see what happens on election day. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Today I've got a very special guest with me, and we're gonna talk about an issue that has been, a burr in the saddle for so many people in Rockland and Westchester, and it has to do with the naming of the new Tappan Zee Bridge. But I'll introduce him in just a second. Let me just give you my website for my campaign, which is www.mikeinthehouse.com. That is mikeinthehouse.com. That's my campaign website, as well as my Facebook page, which is just Parietti for Congress. And you can go on there. We probably won't take any questions during this segment because we've got a lot of ground to cover. But if you have any questions for me or about my positions or my campaign, you can contact me on Facebook at Parietti for Congress or on my website, which is mikeinthehouse.com. All right, thank you very much. Anyway, today we have Dr. Monroe Mann, who is a local attorney. He lives in Port Chester, but he is also the executive director of the SAVE OUR TAPPAN ZEE nonprofit organization. It was an organization started with the goal of reinstating the name Tappan Zee into the name of the new bridge that spans the Hudson. But anyway, without further ado, let me bring him on, and he's going to tell us about himself and about how he got involved in all this. Dr. Mann?
Hey, good morning, Mike. Thank you so much. Great to be here. And yeah, I'm excited that you got in touch with me. I started this drive to preserve what is such a logical name for the bridge back in 2017 when I first heard that the name was going to change. I'd been following the new Tappan Zee developments for years. I was so excited, and then one day on the news, boom, I wasn't even paying attention. I just heard Governor Mary Cuomo Bridge, and I thought, what the heck? That's got to be a mistake, and it just brought this fury. I feel like the wool had been pulled over all of our eyes. Everyone was so excited, and then he decides to name it after his dad. And but we were talking about.
I remember that too, because I remember, it was going to be named after his father, which, I wasn't wild about that, but I was okay with it until I found out that he was going to strip. Tell us about that. He decided at some point to strip the words Tappan Zee off the bridge, right?
Yeah, and I think I'm sure most of your listeners know, but for those who don't, the name is so significant because Tappan is the name of the Indian tribe. Yes, I did say Indian. I'm not very politically correct. And the Indian tribe that was here in the United States before any of the colonists, and Zee is the Dutch name for sea. And that area across the Hudson there was considered the sea of these Tappan Zee Indians. And it signifies so much history about the trade that happened between the two, the friendship and or even maybe sometimes the conflict. But regardless, there is history there. And I just find the hypocrisy of the fact that when the Christopher Columbus statue in New York City was on the chopping block in the last year because of all the riots and whatnot, Governor Cuomo came out supporting the importance of history and preserving history, and let's not touch the Columbus statue. Well, then why did you touch the name of the Tappan Zee Bridge, which arguably is just as not more important because the Indians were here even before Christopher Columbus. And I'm grateful that Columbus, quote unquote, discovered America, and here we are. I'm on this great radio show with you. But why would anybody want to honor any politician? Forget about his father.
No.
What politician? Even George Washington or Lincoln. No, you do not change the Tappan Zee Bridge to name it after a politician. To me, I think people are more important than politicians. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I mean, I agree 100%. There's so many more worthy people you can name it after. Now, nothing against Mario Cuomo. I mean, as a matter of fact, he did lead quite an interesting life, and he did a lot of good things. But that's besides the point. As a governor of New York, his name is enshrined in history forever. The naming of a bridge is an opportunity to bring light to somebody who has a very compelling life story that's not a politician. And the other thing, too, is it's not so much that he put his father's name on it, it's the fact that they stripped out, that's part of it. They stripped Tappan Zee out of it.
That's what upset me and everyone so much. He was so adamant, he wouldn't even compromise. We had, back at the time, we took our change.org petition. Those of you listening, you can go to saveourtappanzee.org. You can find the link you can still sign it. We're up to 119,000, I think now, almost 120.
Wow.
We took this petition up to Governor Cuomo. So there are 100,000 plus people that say, and he said, I will not even compromise with you. The Tappan Zee name is gone. I will not do even what my father did, which was, because it used to be just the Tappan Zee, it was Governor Mario Cuomo who put Governor Malcolm Wilson's name.
It was him?
On the front of it. And I just find that so, like, hey, Andrew, why don't you follow in your father's footsteps? He's such a great man. Why don't you emulate his policies and emulate his empathy and his true love for history, not as a political machination as he did with the Columbus thing. History only matters when it helps Andrew Cuomo.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Phil Reisman. I was on his show the other day. He told me, because it was the Governor Malcolm Wilson Tappan Zee Bridge.
Correct.
Right? And he said that Malcolm Wilson was he wasn't even governor for that long, like a year or something, but he was from Yonkers. And so when they named it that, all the people in Rockland were mad that they named it for a Yonkers guy, whatever. But anyway, but you're right. At least the Tappan Zee was in there, and I think it was almost like, okay, it's going to be the Governor Mario Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge. And then you're like, well, wait, no Tappan Zee? What?
And honestly, I think he would have. And I know I hope that if you're elected congressman for this district, that you'll recognize that it doesn't matter who elected you. Once you're elected into office, you represent everyone.
Right.
And your job should be to bring people together and try to recognize that I remember, like Andrew Cuomo once said, there's no place in New York for conservatives. And I'm thinking, excuse me, whether the conservatives elected you or not, you still represent these people. And I just don't understand why, if he had an opportunity to you know why he didn't put the Tappan Zee name in there?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Because
I can't figure it out.
I just think it's because, and I hate to say something like this, but it's about ego. And I want my father's name. Because if you put Tappan Zee in, it would still be more the Tappan Zee Bridge, perhaps. And he just went, no, I want my father's name in it, and I want to get rid of any other thing. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really selfish.
I mean, I almost wonder if it's not, this like power corrupts absolutely or whatever. Almost just to flex his muscles, to show, look, I can expunge the words Tappan Zee from the vocabulary of the bridge. That's how powerful I am, because I think that people have such a positive association with those words Tappan Zee. It's almost a subliminal suggestion that wouldn't you want your father's name to be associated with something positive?
You would think, and I think this makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I have a bit of a pet peeve with this because, the reason I'm bringing you on is because I'm running for Congress, and what I would push for is legislation at the federal level that says if a public works project receives federal dollars, that there must be some sort of public participation in the naming of that project, if it's going to have a name.
I would say even further, it's not some form of public participation. No, it's public participation. Tax money needs to meet.
Why it was named the bridge, what the process should be.
Oh yeah.
That was one interesting thing you told me, that shortly, not too long ago, they decided to name. They wanted to come up with choose the next
for the license plate of New York.
License plate or something like that.
Yeah, I think.
Do you remember when they listed it? It just said the Mario Cuomo Bridge, and if Tappan Zee in it, right?
No, 100%. And I was wondering. I wonder if he thought maybe I want to see maybe. I'm sure everyone's going to vote for the bridge named after my dad.
Yeah.
And it didn't win. We were all grateful because.
I mean, do you have any idea? Because I tried to look up the results, and it was kind of like expunged from the record, like as to what the different license plates got in terms of votes.
I have no idea what the ultimate votes were. I just remember that I checked and saw that I don't remember which one won. I think it was a combination plate that had Statue of Liberty plus the mountains and whatnot. But at least there was some measure of public participation, and I think with tax money. Oh, this is what I was on the track of saying before. Is I just feel like we should. I think with all tax money, there should be a website for New York State, or even and for the federal government, for every state, where we get to vote. We vote on where the tax money goes. Everyone thinks that we voted these people into office so that we're just going to let them decide what we're going to do with our money. How about you let us decide, just like we did with this license plate? Give us maybe the congressmen, women. They come up with the top 6 proposals. Hey, we've got an extra $1 million that came in from Department of Transportation Tappan Zee tolls, and every year we're going to have $1 million to do something new with. Where would you like this to go? It can go to funding this school program. It can go to blah 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 blah, and you can put your own percentages, and then it all gets tallied up with computers. It's very
nowadays
efficient.
I think the license plate thing is a perfect example. I mean, they could have easily, if they could do it for a license plate, they could have done the same thing for the Tappan Zee Bridge.
We'll have to look up on that, but anyone who's listening who thinks that the name is gone, it's not gone. I mean, 3 years later, Mike's still talking about it. I'm still talking about it. I see all the smiles here in the station. Everyone is excited about the Tappan Zee name.
I mean, I think from what I've seen, and I've been involved in this for 18 years, and I've been a spectator of politics. I believe that Tappan Zee will eventually be put back in the bridge's name. I mean, I don't even think it's that big of a deal because of the fact that you could just paint the name Tappan Zee under Mario Cuomo's name and all the signs, right? So it's not like you have to take all the signs out. I think ultimately the pressure will build for that, and I honestly think that I'd like to see other people's names on the bridge. Nothing against Mario Cuomo.
Well, you mentioned to me the idea of naming rights. Maybe you could talk more about that?
That's one thing I looked into. I don't know where this demanded for a number of reasons, but I decided to say, hey, what is the fair market value of the naming rights of the Tappan Zee Bridge, right? And I think the best analogy, the best comparison is to Citi Field, the Mets Stadium down in Queens. It's used to be called Shea Stadium, but Citibank cut a deal to buy the naming rights for $20 million a year over 20 years. So it's a $400 million a year deal. But the interesting thing is that all they are getting for their $20 million is the right to put the word city in front of field. It's not even Citibank, so you don't even, a person who didn't know wouldn't even know what business they were in. And in a sense, it's really, they're paying for the I. Because if you had it Citi Field with a city, you just think, oh, it's the Citi Field. But the city with the I, Citibank, they're willing to pay $20 million a year just for that because they know the power of name recognition, right? And the association with something that people have a positive feeling about, which is like Shea Stadium or the Mets, right? So I said, okay, let's do the numbers. So it's $20 million a year. I went to the Major League Baseball, the ESPN's got a lift, the Major League Baseball attendance records. I looked at what the attendance for Shea Stadium or Citi Field was. I averaged it, it's been in place for 11 years, I averaged it out. The attendance every year is 2.4 something million. So it's about 2.4 million. Actually, I think I have the exact numbers in here somewhere, but the thing is so they're paying $20 million a year for 2.4 million attendees, right? So then I looked up on on some of the sites. I found one to say what is the number of vehicles crossing the Tappan Zee Bridge every day. And I think it's a Highway Traffic Technology website has it listed as 104. I think the old bridge was 138,000. This is 140,000 vehicles cross the bridge every day. And then I looked up in the Federal Highway Administration and found out that the average occupancy rate of all vehicles, averaged all together, that's all different kinds of vehicles, is 1.67. So if you multiply 140,000 by 1.67 people, you get 233,800 people crossing the Tappan Zee Bridge every day. And then if you multiply 232,000 by 365, you end up with 85,337,000 people crossing the bridge every year. Okay, so then you take the 2.4 million people that go to Citi Field every year, you divide that into 85 million, and you end up with, 34.6. You multiply that by 20 million, so in other words, they're paying 20 million for 2.4, you divide it into 85 million. You get 34.6 times 20 million. You end up with a fair market naming value of the bridge of $692 million a year.
Yeah.
Now, I realize that's just a ballpark estimate, and
Yeah.
no pun intended, but I'll tell you what, at the very least, if you allowed you put it up for bids, corporations would clearly pay us a few $100 million, if not more.
Right now, and we all know every state is suffering financially,
Right.
Great shortfalls because of the pandemic and the shutdown of everything, so there's no tax revenue, blah, blah, blah. And if that is accurate, $600 million, shouldn't he immediately? Andrew Cuomo, I am imploring you, for every New Yorker who's struggling financially right now, why don't you immediately start a bidding war saying who wants the naming rights for this bridge?
Right.
And Grant, do I want the Tappan Zee name in it? Yes, but I think as you were suggesting is that the Tappan Zee name should be in it, but whoever's the bidder will always preface it.
Right,
So it'd be
right.
like City Fields.
Yeah, well, and the amazing thing is, I bet you that corporations or whoever wanted this, and I'm not saying it should be named after a corporation, I'm just using it as an example to show the fair market value of something like this. They would probably want Tappan Zee to stay in the name, because just like city, they understand the value that Tappan Zee has such a positive association. They want to be associated with that positive thing, so they would pay more to leave the Tappan Zee name in, if they called it the FedEx Tappan Zee Bridge. So, that's the strange thing about why he stripped the words out of the name of the bridge. One other thing I'll point out, interestingly, is it's all about name recognition. Politics is all about name recognition, right? And you know how that is. If your father was a famous politician, you can often run on his coattails. It's the name recognition. So the point is, he named it after his father, Mario Cuomo, but in reality, it's his family's surname. It can only help him politically. And in political campaigns, you have to file these campaign disclosure reports, and you are required to report in-kind donations. So in other words, if a guy owned a billboard and he said to me, "Hey Mike, you just put your name up on the billboard, you don't have to pay me anything," I would have to report the fair market value of that billboard as an in-kind contribution. So I've looked at where Cuomo's is, just to be sure. I looked at his filings, and it does not have any in-kind contribution to the tune of several $100 million from the federal government or from the state. And the one important point I should point is that the Mario Cuomo Bridge cost about $3.9 billion to make, and it received about $1.6 billion in federal funding. So that's my point. As a congressman, I would push for legislation that says, you want federal money? Okay, you're going to commit to certain rules about how it's going to be named.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea is if you're getting federal funds, it should be a name that has some type of federal appeal. Governor Mario Cuomo Bridge, nobody in California cares, but guess what? Californians help pay for a bridge named after a former governor of New York, who is far less famous, and sorry, Andrew Cuomo, but your dad did not do as much as the Tappan Zee Indians and the Dutch.
Over centuries.
Because your dad would never have been governor, and neither would you, if these two groups of people did not meet and develop this state into what it is. And that's what blows my mind. The Dutch on the New York state flag are the Tappan Zee Indians and the Dutch.
Okay, wow.
There's no Governor Mario Cuomo on the
I
New York
think
state
it's kind of
flag.
neat to have a name, and that might be the only name I know, I should think, where you have a name that has got, the Native American and European both mixed into it. That's
What
pretty
could be
neat.
more historical? And that's the thing. History, it's always political. I mean, think about why is Governor Cuomo supporting Christopher Columbus, his Italian namesake, quote unquote, but not supporting history when it comes to the bridge? Oh, because then it interferes with his namesake. Because I think everything with Andrew Cuomo, it seems like he just wrote a book explaining how well he did this, handle the pandemic.
Lessons learned from the pandemic.
But, excuse me, you had almost more nursing home deaths than in any other state, and I just feel like, take a deep breath and recognize you represent us. This is not your platform to be, as they call him, King Cuomo. You're not King Cuomo, and one day that Tappan Zee name is going to come back. One thing that's great is on the news, you still hear them calling it the Tappan Zee Bridge, and on maps it's still the Tappan Zee, and everyone who talks about it, it's still the Tappan Zee. So no matter, anyone who's listening, don't lose faith. It's still the Tappan Zee. It always will be. Just keep making sure that your kids know when they're getting the driver's licenses. Make sure their kids teach it to their kids. This is going to be one of these oral histories of the New York people after someone.
Did he say he was vindictive or an insult?
Yeah.
What did he say?
He
about
said
that
it was
exactly?
vindictive. He said it was like how dare you insult my father, and this is real. And he claimed that I worked for, not the Koch brothers, but some other big conservative. I wish, Andrew Cuomo, that I was working for one of these billionaire conservative entrepreneur titans, because I think I'd have a much bigger home and a nicer car and all that. And he didn't even think to say, maybe it's actually the people speaking. Maybe this guy Monroe Mann is genuinely a lover of New York and really just wants the history of this great state to be preserved, and that has nothing to do with you or your dad. Get over yourself. It had nothing to do with you, and it still has nothing to do with Andrew or Mario.
We all, well, I could go into his father's life, which there is some interesting aspects. He did a lot of good things. He, like every politician, he had his detractors and his supporters. But it's not, we all, the vast majority of us revere our fathers and our mothers. And we would love to see their, and we all feel they're worthy. I think my father and mother, I can tell you about them, they're both worthy of having their name on the bridge. Well, I realize it shouldn't be up to one person. Let's come together.
That's what I say.
To find somebody.
If Governor Cuomo sponsored it by, did he put up $1 billion of his own money? Okay. But even then, your name gets on the front, and it's still the Tappan Zee. That's what blows my mind.
The other thing too, and that's why I think that we should have some public participation. I know there is a bill in the Senate right now.
Is this
the
the
state Senate?
State Senate.
Right, the state Senate, to rename the New York State Thruway Frederick Douglass. But I tell you the truth, I think it's a good idea, because right now it's named after Dewey, who's a governor. No offense to him, but he is a governor. His name will be enshrined in history forever. Whereas Frederick Douglass, I think it's a very metaphorical name, because Frederick Douglass was an escaped slave who fled north, and he said an allegory of his journey north. He went to Rochester, and from there he set up a base of operation where he fought slavery and abolition and everything. And he lived an amazing life. I think I would love to see it named after Frederick Douglass, and so I think we should consider the same thing with the Tappan Zee Bridge. And I have my own ideas. I'll just throw out there. It's not up to me, but to give you an example, if we named the, right now you see the Mario Cuomo name and you think, our system's broken, right? That's the impression you get. And that rubs off on his father, unfortunately, right? So you have a negative association. But if we named the bridge after some iconic heroes who really lived an exemplary life or had, committed some act of heroism, I think every time you drive across the bridge and you see that, you have this positive, wow, we all came together as a community, as a state, to honor this iconic hero. And the two examples that I can think of are, one is the man in the red bandana, who was, his name was Wells Crowther. He was from Nyack. He was a volunteer firefighter in Nyack, and he lived in Upper Nyack. And he was in, I think it was Tower 2 when the plane hit, and it hit under him, and he was fine. He called his mother and said, I'm okay. And he ran around, I think, and he found one of the open stairwells. And he ran up and down the stairwell a bunch of times. He ran around trying to save people's lives. They verified that he saved 18 people's lives. And the thing is, here's an example of a guy who could have gotten out of the building, right? But instead of, he saw danger and he ran towards it with the intent of saving other people's lives. And he ultimately laid down his own life because he never came out of the building. They later found him. They think he was huddled with the firefighters in the lobby. So he was that close to running out of the building and saving himself. He was huddled with them trying to figure out a way to save more people. I think he is an iconic hero that if we put his name on that bridge, everyone would have a very positive feeling every time they saw it. The other name I think of is Dr. James Mahoney, I think his name was. He was a physician in New York City for decades. He treated AIDS patients. He treated people from 9/11, and he was treating people in the latest pandemic. He was in his late 60s, and I think he was warned that he may have had some comorbidities or something, to protect himself, stop treating patients, go home, get out of the hospital. He refused to do it. He continued to treat patients on the front line until he contracted the virus himself and died. So here's another guy who, when he saw danger, instead of running from it, he ran towards it to save other people and ultimately laid down his life. If you name the bridge the Crowther-Mahoney Tappan Zee Bridge, I think the positive feeling people would have every time you cross that bridge would be a boost to our society. I'm not saying it should be named after them, it should be public righteousness, but that's an example of who you could name it after.
We elect people to office because we, as the general public, don't have the time to deal with the minutia of running the government. But there are certain matters that every taxpayer has the time to set aside. And I think everyone would have the time to set aside to say, you know what, I'd like to vote. And maybe we go to the office, go to the polls. There should be, okay, and there's always naming. There's always naming things on the ballot. We're going to name this. We're going to name that.
It's referendum. Yeah.
It should be referendums. There should be some things that the people decide. Maybe the other thing I was thinking is that if there were, maybe I wouldn't mind so much if it was the Governor Mario Cuomo Tappan Zee Bridge. If every 10 years someone new is thrown on the front of it.
Sure.
So it's only 10 years, but a landmark should have one base name that never changes. And everyone, one of the first people who signed the petition wrote, we have to stop changing names because we lose the sense of a place. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, how is a bridge any different from a city name? And New York City was it New York City or Portland or Seattle or destroyed in fires? I think it was Portland or Oregon, I forget. It was destroyed maybe 2 or 3 times completely. When they rebuilt it again, did they give it a brand new name? And that was
they named it after the governor's father.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the argument was like new bridge,
Cuomo City or something.
New Cuomo City. But and we laugh, but that's exactly, there's no difference. And if we're not careful, and if we don't stop this stupidity, they're going to end up naming a Haverstraw after Cuomo.
Or somebody.
And people go, that's absurd. It's not absurd. There was a bridge. There was a name for it already, and everyone knows it. All the maps. You talked about how in Jersey there are still, I hope I'm not shooting ourselves in the foot by mentioning this, there's still many signs in Jersey approaching New York that say the Tappan Zee Bridge.
If you come up 287 from Jersey, you're driving up, and the big green signs, it says, whatever, and this is the Tappan Zee Bridge. And then you go about another 100 yards, you cross the New York border, and then it's the Mario Cuomo Bridge.
What if someone's coming up from Florida?
they think you're headed to the Tappan Zee, then they see the Mario Cuomo.
Where the heck is this Tappan Zee? And I'm not advocating that New Jersey change the signs. I'm glad they still say Tappan Zee, and I hope they do, because that's the name of the bridge. But that's how stupid it is. There are so many more important things to spend taxpayer money on than constantly changing names to satisfy somebody's ego. And that's the other argument why there needs to be a base name. You can't constantly keep changing. What if every year there are 5,000 landmarks and their names are changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really the thing here is really the abuse of power. You're the governor, and you've got a tremendous political clout and leverage, and you can wheel over people, and we have to believe that's why they put the name on the bridge, not because everybody wanted it, because he wanted it, and they didn't want to stand up to him. They didn't want to stick their neck out. And, so I think that this is an issue that will live on, and I ultimately think the words Tappan Zee will be put back into the official name. That's just my gut feeling based on what I know about politics.
And it's a government, federal government and state government, they've all gotten way too big, and all the politicians, and it's because of this problem with term limits, but causes major problems. And I know that you said that when you win, you're not going to be a career politician, right?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer in term limits, and I would commit to only doing 4 terms. And I think I have a pretty well-worn reputation in Rockland County. I've got my detractors, I've got my supporters, but I think they would all agree that if I say I'm going to do something, I usually do it. And so I wouldn't do more than 4 terms. That'd be 8 years, and I would definitely hold myself to that. Mario Cuomo actually was a professional baseball player. Do you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was in college as a baseball player. He was signed by the Pittsburgh Pirates to a deal. He went down to Georgia to play in their farm team. He was down there for years. Then he got injured. He had hit him to pitch them. Then he gave it up. He came home, and he ran for office many times, and he ultimately was elected governor. And I think he was known for his opposition to the death penalty his entire career, and he did a lot of positive things with families and education and schools and stuff like that. So he definitely led a good life, a remarkable life. But I think that his name is enshrined in history forever because he's a governor. So we better off let's tell a story about somebody who did really something truly remarkable in their lives and put their name on the bridge.
But the Tappan Indians and the Dutch certainly are quote unquote marginalized in history, but far more important in terms of the lasting legacy that they've had on this state.
Yeah, sure.
And
Yeah, the Dutch had a very, if you read, there's a book called The Island at the Center of the World. It talks about how the Dutch, when they set up the city council, which is an interesting political struggle, it's reminding me so much of our local politics. You know, they fought with the governor of New York to get representation, because at first it was a company town and they just had to do whatever the governor told them. They eventually won the right, over many years, to the city council, which is essentially a award system. The different parts of the city each have someone who represents them in the city council. When the British took over, they left that system in place, which became sort of the genesis of our representative democracy years later.
No.
Let me just say something. I know a lot of people have been calling in to ask questions. We decided we had a lot of ground to cover. We decided not to take calls. But, Dr. Mann, what's your contact information? How can people get in touch with you if they have a question or a comment, if they want to sign the petition? Can you go over that for us quickly?
Sure. 2 websites. SaveOurTappanZee.org is the website for the company and the not-for-profit, and you can volunteer if you'd like to help out. You can send me a petition, and to find out more about me, my website is monroemannlaw.com, MonroeMannlaw.com, and I'm happy to hear from anybody who wants to help keep the name alive. All we have to do is just keep the name alive. 3 years later, and this great gentleman, Mike Parietti, called me up and said, hey, I saw you, blah, 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 would you like to be, wow, I can't believe it, 3 years later, people are still interested in talking about it.
I signed your original petition, so I was very upset about it then, and I'm still upset about it, and I think that if I were in Congress, I'd push for fragile legislation that would prevent something like this from happening.
That's wonderful.
Let me just mention, if anyone has a question for me or a comment for me, you can go to my website, mikeinthehouse.com, or on Facebook, it's Parietti for
How do you spell Parietti?
Parietti, it's Parietti. I didn't put that in my website name, I figured nobody would be able to remember it, so I put Mike in the House. Mike in the House, which hopefully will come to fruition. But
I love that.
Let me talk about my campaign a little before we sign off. We've got a few minutes left here. I'm running for Congress in the 17th District. I'm running on the Serve America Sam Lyon Road H. And I'm running because I want to bring attention to our local corruption, our local issues, and I'm also concerned about national dysfunction. You know, our politics is so polarized at the national level that there's a lot of gridlock, a lot of paralysis, a lot of vitriol fighting back and forth. But in reality, I truly believe that there's a supermajority of moderate Americans in the middle that are perfectly capable of working through our differences and moving this nation forward. And so that's what I would like to try. You know, in Rockland County, we had this situation where we were fighting the block vote, and so in order to regain our fair share of representation, we had to organize ourselves. And we did that by trying to get people of goodwill on both sides of the issues, on both sides of the national issues, to set aside the differences on those issues, to come together locally, unite our vote behind candidates that would act in the best interest of the greater good. And we've been very successful at that. It's a long story, but we have sort of, you know, it's been a running battle, but we've evened the playing field a bit. We're no longer at the mercy of the bloc. You know, it's a battle every year. But I would follow the same course of action in Congress. I would look to find moderates, people of goodwill on both sides of the aisle. If elected, and I'm running as a nonpartisan independent candidate, up the middle as a moderate. If elected, I'm not going to caucus with either major party, but I would try to act as a moderating force on both parties. And I would look for moderates from both sides of the aisle to work together to come up with balanced, common sense legislation to address our local concerns, but also our national concerns. So, I mean, that's what I'm about generally. One very important thing about my campaign I'd like to mention as well is the fact that I'm only accepting donations from private citizens that live within the 17th district. And I'm not taking any donations from political action committees or any other groups or organizations. I'm the only candidate in this race that has made that pledge. Everybody else is taking money from outside the district and from political action committees. One in particular, Monroe Jones, he is my opponent on the Democratic line. He has received enormous amounts of cash donations from people from across the country. The vast majority of his money is coming in from outside of the district, much of it from big cities and political action committees on the far left. But I just think, in reality, people from outside the district should really not have any say in who is going to represent them. They've got their own districts. Let them worry about who's going to represent them, not us. I understand this is the law of the land. You're allowed to give these donations. You know, they can give as much money as they want. They can give the same amount of money to our candidates as we can give to our own candidates. I think it shouldn't be that way. There should be a contribution limit on people who don't live in a congressional district. That's one tenth or less. And you know, the Supreme Court did not strike down limits on individuals. Okay, those are in place for a long time. I think you could easily make that law where people from outside the district can't give as much. The problem is that almost everybody in Congress has been elected on the backs of this kind of money, so they would never change it. The only way to change it is to find candidates who will lead by example and refuse to take that money, and then vote with your, you know, put your money where your mouth is. Vote for these candidates that you know will represent our interests, not the interests of somebody else. And so, I'm not taking any of that money, and I would appreciate your vote, because when I got into Congress, I will be voting and acting in the best interest of the people of Rockland and Westchester counties and nobody else.